Y.A.M.A, the Young Adult Muslim Association at Masjid Y.A.M.A, and we are giving a talk on race and religion tonight. So I'm just going to introduce to you all a couple of people speaking, and then we'll get started. So again, I introduced myself. This is Yusef. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois. His dissertation is called Islam in Black and Brown, the Making of Muslim Communities and Intrafaith Dialogue in East Central Illinois. And then we have Brother Ismael Saleem, who is an author and poet, also very active in Y.A.M.A. And then we have Brother Kasib, who just wants to go with Brother Kasib for tonight. He's the he does the adhan at the masjid. Yeah, thank you. And Brother Millard and Sister Julinard are parking, but they're part of Y.A.M.A, and they're doing a portrait presentation at the end, and they'll introduce themselves. Julinard is the president of Y.A.M.A, and Millard is the vice president. And when she comes up at the end, she can give you the mission statement for Y.A.M.A, so I'm going to just go ahead and move forward. I have the shortest part, inshallah, of the presentation, and I'm just speaking to kind of an overview on race. Not so much the religion aspect for my portion, but I just kind of want to go over race, cultural differences, and worldviews. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end, so if there's anything that is said that you have any questions about, then we'll allow for time at the end of the presentation to discuss those. So I began on the very basic level speaking to the out of Africa model, and it's essentially the idea that human evolution began in Africa. That the first modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, began in Africa and migrated to other continents roughly 150,000 years ago. And that the differences in human diversity and cultural diversity that we see today expressed in society is largely a result of our patterns of migration, various stretches of immobility, our isolation, and acclimatization, meaning the changes in the environment and how our skin, hair texture, facial features, etc. adapted to the environments in which we were in. So this is just a visual diagram. This is from the National Geographic of the Out of Africa model, and it's just showing how, again, human life began in Africa and then evolved throughout the other continents. Okay, so when we talk about race, and you know, we live in America, so if you are in America, you have a very good understanding of race and racism, particularly as an economic system of white supremacy. But we talk about a basic definition of race. We understand that race has existed for over 5,000 years in various societies. The earliest prevalence of race in society is generally linked to India. But when we're trying to define race, generally, academically speaking, we define it historically as descendants of a common ancestor, emphasizing kinship linkages rather than physical characteristics, meaning related to by blood. So historically, when we talk about races, we talk about nations, civilizations, etc. We're not talking about phenotype, we're not talking about hair color, texture, the width of your nose, or anything like that. But historically speaking, it referred more to descendants of the same ancestor. But we see by the 18th century that there started to be a shift in usage, which started to change from kinship to physical characteristics. And this shift was largely promulgated by the advances of European capitalism and the transatlantic slave trade. So in the 1700s, we had the growth of the transatlantic slave trade. We had the economic development of Europe at the consequence of the underdevelopment of Africa. And we start to have these economic systems based on exploitation that needed a justification for why inequality was unfolding the way that it was. And so we started to see the shifting of race from just meaning kinship to actual physical characteristics. And it was, in America, in England, it was really advanced by Johann Blumenbach's doctoral dissertation on the natural variety of men in 1775. And he's the first, Linnaeus is credited with like the first system of classification. He was a botanist, so he classified humans and plants. But Blumenbach was the first one that really outlined the racial classification system that we use today. Like it's even defined on the way in which we record even in our census. So based on this doctoral dissertation, he outlined 5 divisions of races. And you have Native Americans and Alaskan Natives, Asians and Pacific Islanders. That's supposed to be a slash instead of a question mark, excuse me. African and African Americans or blacks, Hispanics or Latinos, and Caucasians or whites. And although there wasn't scientific evidence to support this breakdown of races in this way, that it really became the major criterion in which we started to rank human beings. And of course, European scholars placed themselves at the top of the hierarchy. And so they created this classification system with these 5 demarcations and suggested that Europeans were at the highest of that level, and by virtue, the more melanin you had, the lower you went down in evolution. With African or African descendants at the bottom. This is a lot on this, so I'm just going to summarize. But we know that biologically race isn't real, that 99.9% of our genetic markers are the same. And if you think about that out of Africa model, it makes sense. If we all originated from the same 2 human beings, then there's not a lot of genetic differentiation between our genes. But we do know, in terms of sociology, and I'm a sociologist by training, that we really define race more as a social construct that is not biological, genetic, but it's more so an unequal relationship between people that is historically specific. And it's very based, it depends very much on social conditions, meaning that what it meant to be white in the United States is very different, or we didn't even call it white in the earliest forms, but what it meant to be of European descent, or Polish, or Irish, or Scottish, changed from the early 18th century to the 19th century. And we created this idea of whiteness to really separate a group that was going to receive privileges in America that other groups wouldn't. The same way that what it meant to be Arab in 1924 was different after 1924. And we define blackness very much in the ways in which, based on slave codes and the the institution of slavery, in a way that blackness was reserved for everything that was not white, because they wanted to reserve privileges for whites in society. And so, although we say race is not genetic, it's not biological, it has very real implications, as we know, that if you are black in America, if you are white in America, if you're Arab in America, then the color of your skin really influences not only your life experiences, but your access to loans, education, housing, healthcare, how you're treated in the criminal justice system, as we know what's going on presently. We can have folks take up arms in Oregon and not have a revolution on our hands. And so when we say that it's not real, we don't mean that it doesn't have real implications. We just mean that there's no biological basis for it. It's something that shifts throughout time, and it's something that we create. Now, when we start to think about different groups and cultural diversity, outside of how we originated in terms of our earliest interactions with nature, it yielded different cultural differences among people. And so when we talk about what accounts for these differences, I like to borrow from Edwin Nichols' model, the philosophical aspects of cultural difference. And essentially, he has 4 parts to his model. I'm going to talk about axiology and epistemology, the first 2 parts more so. But it essentially says, based on your ethnic orientation, the way in which you view the world is going to be based on this orientation. And the way in which you see or experience the world is going to be based on your ethnic orientation. And so this is an abbreviated version of this whole model. Joy Leary, the author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, does a lot with this model as well. But if you begin with the first ethnic group, or not first in terms of importance, but just the first listed, Europeans or European Americans. And I just want to put emphasis on this term because sometimes when we say, we want to hyphenate everybody else, like that's here, like we say African Americans, Asian Americans, and then we say Americans like whites originated in America. And so I love when scholars say European Americans because it denotes their origin the same way it denotes other people's origin. But European Americans, when we think about the environment in which Europeans came of age in, that there wasn't access to a lot of materials. And so if you're living in an environment of scarcity, that there's a lot of focus on the need to get things. So whether it's clothing, shelter, food, etc., then the importance of which you put, where you lie your importance tends to be on objects. And so if you have to worry about when you have to plant so that you can have enough food to eat, when you have to worry about what to hunt, then you spend a lot of time focusing on gaining things and getting material. And the way in which you relate to things is you start to measure things, you need to count it. You don't think, it's the idea that if it's not real, if you can't see it, it's not real. Like you have to be able to count it and qualify it and quantify it, excuse me. But in the African American, African and Latino experience, remember that these cultural groups came of age where everything they needed was in their immediate environment. So there was fruits and berries, there was things to eat, there was things to build, and so there wasn't a need to go out and look for anything or to conquer. And we think about the history of trade, we know that Africans, when engaging in trade with other civilizations, were engaging in trade for supplemental things. They weren't trading for food, they weren't trading for things to build shelter, that they had everything they needed in their immediate environment. And so there wasn't the same type of energy or conquest, the mind state, to go out and get things and to gain things. And so you don't see in Africa the same history of conquering and conquest. You don't see a shifting in economic systems from agrarian society or communalism to slavery or capitalism as an economic base in the way that you do in Europe. And so where we came of age and how we relate, our cultural group, while we are of the same race, quote unquote, that our cultural, the ways in which we relate to each other culturally is very much related to our environment. And this is my last slide before I shift to Yusef, that when we see how cultures come into contact with each other, then you can see where the importance of their value lies. Africans had the same access to materials, irons, golds, metals, etc., and we weren't building weaponry. That in those societies we were, even if you think about Osirian society, some people view that society as polytheistic instead of monotheistic, and there's others who suggest that it was a very monotheistic society because they had one creator, the sun god, and the different entities were attributes of that god. But however you see Aboriginal or ancient African civilizations, the idea was that spirituality was very much embedded in all those civilizations. That in the music, in the culture, that from birth to death, there was a celebration around life and celebrating a creator. And so you don't see the same types of shifts in society and technological development that you do in Europe. And to some that can be a limitation because instead of trying to look at new ways to irrigate the land or farm, people were praying to God for change, or they were doing rain dances for change, etc. So they weren't driven by the same shift in economic growth in a way that Europe was. So you see in European society clear demarcations from communalism to capitalism to feudalism and then to imperialism. And so I just kind of want to give you a little background of race, how we relate to each other, and why there are some differences in how various groups interact. And then if you have any questions, we'll kind of go to the end. But right now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Yusef. And
I guess I want to continue along the same vein with what Dr. Y.A.M.A was speaking about, focus it a bit more within the discussion of Islam. Unfortunately, in the Muslim community, there is this understanding that we are not to talk about race. You know, we all understand that to be a racist as a Muslim is haram. You know, we understand all of that. We know that, you know, we know the hadith about no superiority over there, this and that. We've all heard that. And I think that's good, but that's kind of a dangerous position because what we need to understand is at times there needs to be a distinction between Islam and Muslims. There's no racism in Islam, but there's plenty of racism among Muslims. And particularly what makes this idea that we shouldn't talk about race so dangerous is that, one, it kind of presents the problems of racism as a whole as something that's totally internal. And at the point that, you know, it's, I guess specifically a term to be used is kibba. It's an Arabic term called kibba, which kind of connotes arrogance or, you know, being prideful. But the problem with that is it kind of situates everything as being internal, where both the problems and solutions to this issue are in fact internal as well. And that makes it very difficult to see anything wrong with the structure or any types of structural barriers involved in your existence in wherever you're residing. And even more dangerously, it kind of sets the stage for whatever type of discrimination is appearing, whether it be real or imagined. It allows it to continue unchecked. Because at the point that it goes, at the point that it's understood as being something internal, you know, if it's all about you, if it's an issue of kibba, it's all about what you got going on the inside, you're taking that various phenomenon and you're placing it beyond critique. So that's another thing. And even when you look at the Arabic, the language of Arabic, what I thought was very interesting is that there actually is no term for race. There is no classical Arabic term for race. What you do have is a modern standard word called unsuriya or ansuriyat, which would be racism. But the closest thing we have in the classical Arabic language in terms of a word that means race that kind of is similar to how we understand it would be al-jins. It's a word that kind of means, but it's a universal word, and if any of you have ever studied Arabic, you understand that lots of different words can have actually the same characters but mean different things based on where your kasra, your dhamma, your fatha, and all that stuff is placed. So even when you look at jins, closest thing we have, but even still it means genus or species. It also means gender, you know, and if you ever are reading some Arabic text, it will actually appear as something like jins al-arab or jins al-swat, you know, for blacks. The most popularly used term among Muslim anthropologists is a term called nasab, al-nasab. Most popularly used amongst the scholars and anthropologists, and that kind of speaks specifically to a lineage. So what you have, even in what I presented to you in terms of the linguistics of it, you have several different terms that can be used kind of interchangeably to mean different things at different times. Now, in terms of the words that are actually in the Quran, you see shuru, which is actually is the plural of shab, which means a people. And then there's these another term that you would see called kabila or kabab, which means just a tribe. Now, I just want to use those things to kind of get your mind to see as far as what Islam itself, or even the linguistic limitations for understanding how we understand these terms exist. Because if you've ever studied any foreign language, it doesn't have to be Arabic, you understand that English is a little bit different in terms of the way that we use our words. Now what I want to do for you is I just kind of want to focus on specifically how, well, raise your hand if you've noticed there seems to be a distinct difference between Muslim communities, like your black Muslim community. You know, that's kind of, well, see, here's the issue that I had. When I was invited here today, I was like, okay, great. Problem is, I, at this point, have 134 pages of typed work, and I got 25 minutes. So what I'm going to do for you guys is I'm basically just going to map out some of the things that could possibly account for the differences in the different communities. Initially, the Arabs that came to America, well, racial identity in general was kind of determined by this thing called common knowledge. Common knowledge is basically a set of pseudo-scientific prejudicial ideas that determined what you were racially or culturally simply based on what you look like. Of course, these things were the width of the nose, hair texture, skin color, those things. And basically up until 1919, you're looking at, it was explicitly stated that citizenship in America was restricted to free white persons. Can't be any more clear than that. But what you have is that, well, prior to 1965, there were very few immigrants from the Muslim world coming to America. And because there were so few of them, and with a lot of them having lighter complexions, you know, with straighter hair, they sort of kind of shared some of the phenotypical features of whites. Not necessarily skin color, but you know, they're like, well, close enough. There's not enough of you to pose any threat. So they pretty much enjoyed all the privileges of whiteness, even though they didn't explicitly have citizenship. Then what you'll see now is how race is actually influenced by lots of other socioeconomic and socio-political factors. Because what you had in 1910, the Arabs became Asiatic. Anybody know what happened in 1910? What was going on globally in 1910? World War I. Oh. Well, what it was is that... Right. Well, what you end up having in 1910 with the breakout of the World War I, what you had was the Syrians were thought to be part of the Ottoman Empire because the Ottoman Empire actually fought on the opposite side of the Americans. They kind of use it as an excuse to change the census data where I'm like, okay, well, if you fought with the quote-unquote Asian nations, you're Asian. So at that moment, like overnight, they became Asian and were no longer citizens. Really interesting situation. And this actually was used as an impetus to put official legislation into policy to bar these people from the Muslim world from getting citizenship. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know is very important to also understand that the early immigrants from the Muslim world were Christians. They were, in fact, not Muslims. Now, ask yourself, how is it that they end up in America? Here's another different circumstance you have here considering the way they understood race, and even the way they understood minority and majority populations. In the Arab world, they didn't necessarily have a construct of race that functions the same way we do here in America. So what happens is when the Christian missionaries went over into these areas, you know, it pretty understood like, okay, well, you're from a Christian nation. Well, majority identity status was determined by your spiritual or your religious orientation as opposed to a, you know, racialized one. Therefore, a lot of these Christians from the Muslim world, they immigrated to the United States in the early 20th century because they thought that they would have a majority experience because they said, hey, it's a Christian nation, we're Christians. And that set the stage for a whole bunch of other crazy stuff I'm about to share with you now. Up to, particularly between the years of 1909 and 1923, a third of all federal and state level court cases dealt with integration, specifically racial categorization of these people that aren't quite, they're not black, because you gotta remember, this is the beginning of Jim Crow, fresh out of slavery in some states, still have slavery going on in some states. So they're kind of functioning as at a racial go-between. Like, okay, they kind of look like us, but they're not as dark as them. And what you had is this development of, during these court cases, of these two different defenses. And it's kind of interesting because what you see in the Arab move towards whiteness and their push for citizenship, they took these pseudo-racialist understandings of identity and used them to their advantage. For example, when you see a picture of Jesus, what does he look like? He's white, right? So what you had was specifically between the years of 1909 and 1915, you had these immigrants from the Muslim world, who were actually Christians, going into court saying, well, we have to be white. You have to give us citizenship. We're white. The judge said, well, how are you white? They point to the wall and say, if he's white, we must be white. He's from where we're from. Seriously. And then, you know, there was that whole deal, and then you had what they call the whole Semite. That's the one I call the Jesus defense. That's not an official name, that's just what I call it. I thought that was kind of cool. And then you had the whole Semite argument. Well, it's like, well, if Jews are, quote unquote, accepted in this country and they've been accepted into whiteness, again, Jesus was a Jew, right? They're Semites, you call them white. They're from where we're from. So you kind of got that whole deal there. Then what you had is the Immigration Act of 1917 came along, and it officially made specifically Palestinians and Syrians white. Yada, 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 yada. Got about a span of 15 years comes along, and Arabs, they kept changing identities. So Arabs were white in 1909, 1910, and 1915, but not in 1913 or 1914. And so with whiteness becoming essential to the gaining of citizenship, they were in a situation where they constantly had to reconstruct or renegotiate their identities for the sake of enjoying the benefits of majority citizenship. Consequently, this means that they broke their necks to achieve this standard of whiteness. And if you've ever read Dr. Sherman Jackson, his book, The Third Resurrection, specifically a discussion about how blacks have to, I guess, establish their own self-made authenticating sources for Islam, he calls it mutable whiteness that these Arabs have achieved. Now, in them breaking their necks to become white, they've changed their names. A lot of them have joined Christian, well, not Christian churches, but like Catholic churches, things like that. They did everything they could, right? Let's move ahead to 1965. Now, in 1965, does anybody know prior to 1965 what the face of Islam in America was?
Black
America, specifically who?
The NOI.
The NOI. Well, there's your problem. What you had with the Nation of Islam specifically is you had a group of people that are coming out of Jim Crow, coming out of slavery, that have a whole different experience of America. It wasn't exactly the land of the free, considering we weren't free. So the Islam that we took on was different. With the Nation of Islam actually served as the official face and served as the official standard, if you will, of Islam in America prior to 1965. You have a very, you have a religious organization that very much has a very strong political stance, very racialist stance. They're also very anti-establishment and very anti-integration. Well, when you take that group of, Islam as it was experienced in the black community during that time, and you juxtapose it to the post-1965 Muslim immigrants, they're breaking their necks to associate, right? So if you're the United States government, right, you got the civil rights movement going on, King going out there, Malcolm X scaring people, it's in your best interest to posit one particular group as the official face of Islam. You have these, you have these quote-unquote black radicals over here, anti-establishment guys, and then you got these very assimilationist, apolitical group over here. Which do you think is going to serve the interest of the United States government better? And so you take all those things, and those are just, I guess, the socio-historical baggage that we both bring to this deen. Now, moving beyond that, you also have other factors, socio-economic factors. The first is that the Middle East, and specifically, when you talk about 1965, they came under the 1965 Immigration Act, which was actually a part of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which was in fact a byproduct of the Civil Rights Movement. During the same period in the Middle East, the Middle East is coming fresh out of colonialism, and what they do is they dedicated lots and lots of money into developing higher education systems. However, the money invested into these higher education systems, you had a lot of great programs, doctors, engineers, all that stuff, but there wasn't enough jobs or infrastructure to support it. So you had a lot of highly educated homeless people or unemployed people in the Middle East. Well, with the 1965 Immigration Act, it actually gave preferences to those coming to the United States under reunification with the family, and it gave preference to educated and or skilled professionals. That's how you ended up with a lot of the people coming here, a lot of the immigrants from the Middle East, Muslim immigrants from the Middle East coming to the United States, and they integrated so quickly. A lot of the times they came, you're talking about like 1965, roughly up to 1980, they came here as engineers, they came here as doctors, they came here as like different skilled professionals. Then on top of that, as some of you probably already know, because they were given some sort of political asylum a lot of times because of the extremism, believe it or not, you also had the growth of what we came to understand as Islamic extremism, which was a real turnoff to Muslim, I guess your moderate Muslims and those that were more secular Muslims. So they came here in more pursuit of their interest and money and also money. And so when they got here, they also got grants to start businesses, all those things. So you have this group of people that are coming here with all the necessary tools to integrate quickly and fairly smoothly into the socioeconomic order. And just some figures for you. Between 1965 and 1976, 15% of all Arabs that came here, 15% of all the Arabs that we have in America today as of 2000 came or have their roots from someone that came between 1965 and 76. What you have was a lot of the wealthy Arab families were sending their children to the United States to get educations. But what ended up happening is some of the instability in a lot of these Muslim lands. It led people to come here, get their educations. They were supposed to go back to their lands, but as you know, a lot of them never went because of the instability and the lack of infrastructure to actually support them, support their skills to make a living. And so what you end up with is the gains of the civil rights movement established a social and political context of multiculturalism. So what you also have is the post-1965 immigrants. They were somewhat critical of the earlier generations of immigrants from the Muslim world because they're like, well, you can be a Palestinian and be proud. You can be an Iraqi and be proud. So there wasn't quite this, there wasn't quite the same assimilationist ethos or idea line of thinking to try to be white. However, at this point, you're talking roughly 65, 70 years after the fact, they still took their assimilation cues from the generations before them that broke their necks to tap into this idea of whiteness. And anybody ever heard the model minority myth? Anybody understand what it is? Dr. Wild, do you want to share with us what the model minority myth is? No? Okay, just asking. Okay. Well, the model minority myth is basically stating that it's kind of this idea that people from different parts of the world have come to this country and advanced socioeconomically, politically. They've integrated so much better than black people have. And this is kind of what is used as a means to say that there's nothing wrong with the system. There's something wrong with black people. It's actually something that actually Dr. Swat Kabir calls inferential racism. It's basically, this stereotype was actually more or less used as a godsend for the Arabs to come here because, once again, it's kind of this, promotes this idea of racial know-nothingism term, and this idea that, well, there's space to kind of go in between because we're not white, you know, we're just as dark as the black folk. But we're not understood to be black, so there's kind of this space there. Then on top of that, they're coming in with their educations, they're getting admitted into Ivy League schools, Michigan, stuff like that. Specifically, the school I go to, we had the first large influx of Muslim students in the country. We actually had the first Muslim Student Association in America, all the way back in 1967 at the University of Illinois. And so they kind of used this as a go-between, and they've kind of been playing on it ever since. Now, what this is kind of produced in terms of the scholarship goes is you have these, anybody understand the term Desi? People from like India, Pakistan, they call themselves Desi. Specifically, a lot of the scholars, Islamic scholars, they kind of use this sort of kind of as an excuse, like as a pass, where they say, well, they came here and they took on this racist ideas because it's kind of like we're trying to ideologically integrate into America. And first thing you do as an immigrant is you find out who not to be. So they came here and they kind of looked around and was like, well, okay, we don't want to be them. And so, but the problem with that is, it kind of, my own personal critique of that particular line of thinking is that it disavows the fact that specifically the Middle East, they come from a legacy of European colonialism. And anybody that knows anything about history knows that colorism is a large part of European history. Even if you look at India and Pakistan today, you look at how they treat their own dark-skinned individuals. You know, so, so that kind of speaks to how, historically speaking, we bring different sets of baggage to Islam. You have the appearance of two distinct communities because we're different, really politically, socioeconomically, culturally, and even historically. There's fundamental differences in who we are. And so I think that kind of speaks to kind of how there's this stark difference between the two communities. And all of this, and I guess just to tie up, and all of this is substantiated even further by this thing that Dr. Gosal calls Arabization. He articulated it better than I could. Arabization is best explained as the homogenization of or forming of identities based on institutions, practices, and beliefs attached to the ever-changing, growing Muslim community in Arabia in the years immediately following the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this process, the process initially was aimed at cleansing, you know, Islam of all the different impurities and all the bid'ah and shirk and all that other stuff as it expanded out of the Arabian Peninsula. But the problem with that is you kind of create this situation where you kind of have to wonder what is culture and what is Islam. And I know specifically in the black Muslim community, a lot of times we kind of struggle with that because because we haven't to this point established our own self-authenticating autonomy as a Muslim community. We're in a situation where we're always looking over here to the immigrant side to determine what is best and what is not, what's allowed, this and that and the other. And in closing, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much how you have the differences in appearance of two distinct Muslim communities. And I guess you can do with that what you will. But I think that was the whole point of this, was just trying to paint a different picture for you. Because when we look at them like, oh, you just racist, you just racist. But at the same time, the same way they don't get us, we don't necessarily get them either. So, thank you.
I want to talk about race and religion today. I'm going to start off with the superiority complex from the beginning of the creation of man. When God created man, the angel said, will you place on this earth one who causes corruption and sheds blood, while we praise you and sanctify you? And Allah said, indeed, I know what you do not know. The angels were being presumptuous, and they made assumptions about someone that they did not know. Ignorance was the cause of their prejudice. Satan, or Iblis, said, I am better than him, meaning man, because you have created me from fire, and you have created him from mud. Satan felt superior to man because of that which he was made of. And Cain was punished with a mark for killing his brother Abel. Some people believe that curse or mark was black skin, and for this, black people were treated as less than. And according to the Bible, Noah was drunk, and Ham, his son, saw his father's nakedness, and Noah cursed Ham to be a slave. It is believed that the sons of Canaan were black people, so it was ordained by God for them to be slaves. There are several problems with this. The first one being, why would God uphold a curse by a drunken man? The second is, why would he curse Canaan, Ham's son, for something that Ham did? Could it have to do with the fact that Canaan was also a place where the Canaanites lived? And according to the Bible, God told the Israelites to kill them, take their land, and rename it Israel. Does that sound familiar? This curse was used as a justification for black slavery, and it was taught to slaves and slave masters alike. Ishmael's mother, Hagar, was an Egyptian, and Sarah treated her terribly. Hagar is said to be Sarah's handmaid. The Bible says Ishmael and the Ishmaelites are cursed because they were born of a slave woman, and Isaac, his brother, was born of a free woman. And this is attested to even in the New Testament. But Sarah was Abraham's sister, according to the Bible. So the question becomes, is incest better than marrying a slave woman? The Bible says specifically that you are not to marry specific people, the Midianites. Midian was also another of the sons of Abraham, according to the Bible. But the Israelites were forbidden to marry them. An Israelite man married a Midianite woman, and an Israelite priest murdered them both by stabbing a spear through their stomach. And Moses married an Ethiopian woman, and his brother and his sister mocked her for being from Ethiopia. And God struck his sister Miriam with leprosy, and her skin was as white as snow. In the Songs of Solomon, it reads, I am very dark, but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me, because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons were angry with me. And Jesus told his disciples not to go to the non-Jews, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. A woman came to him with a sick daughter, and because she was a Canaanite, he would not heal her. In fact, he initially ignored her completely. He called this mother and her sick daughter dogs who were not fit for his blessings because they were not Israelites. He also said in another place, according to the Bible, that non-Jews were swine, who are also undeserving of his blessings because they were not Israelites. And speaking of Jesus, so many people today say that his race doesn't matter. Do you know why? Because he was a man of color. With over 2 billion people today worship a black man, he lived in a region where it was hot year-round. The indigenous people there had to be people of color. The Jewish people in that land now were converts to the religion. And today, one of the highest rates of skin cancer is in Israel. It is because they are not indigenous to that land. They are in the company of the Dutch in South Africa, who are also have an extraordinarily high rate of skin cancer. The original Israelites were black and brown. Remember, Moses was an Israelite, and he was taken in by the Egyptians. Obviously, their skin complexion was indistinguishable. And Ishmael is the father of the Arab people. His father, Abraham, was the first Israelite, was the first Hebrew, and his mother was Egyptian. which means the foreparents of the Arabs were black and brown people. And Jewish people are considered chosen people, chosen by God. This is implicit racism. If God chose one people over another people, that would imply that they have something special that other people do not have. This label as the chosen one has led some chief rabbis to conclude that non-Jews are worthless people. Christians also believe that Jews were chosen, despite the fact that they reject Jesus. But the Gentiles that became Christians saw Jews as only white people. The Greeks and Romans made Jesus, God, the disciples, and angels white. Everyone good was white, while Canaan, and the Canaanites, and the descendants of Ishmael were the darker people. In Hinduism, there is a caste system, which is a religious sanctioned racism. Their belief in karma and the caste system suggests that one is a sinner. If one is a sinner, he comes back as a darker and darker person. The most righteous of them are the lightest of them. They also believe that animals and insects were former human beings who lived a sinful life. Thus, after you are a black person, you devolve into the animal and insect kingdom. We have found recently that Gandhi, the most well-known Hindus in modern times, was a huge racist against black people. Though Buddha spoke out against the caste system, this would not exempt Buddhists from having racist views and behaviors. Today, a Buddhist monk with over 2,500 monks in his monastery and thousands of followers on Facebook and YouTube uses paranoia, fear, muddled with racist stereotypes and unfounded rumors to incite violence against Muslims in Burma, according to the Guardian newspaper. Let us not forget that there were Arab Muslims involved in the slave trade. And there are some Arabs today that see themselves as more knowledgeable about al-Islam because the Quran was revealed in Arabic. And non-Muslims have this same false idea. Muslims are obliged to accept the Arabic Quran only, not the Arab culture. We are all privy to the exact same information. Your understanding of religion is based solely on your desire to learn it, not your race, ethnicity, or nationality. And every nation partook in slavery. In fact, Africans enslaved one another. But this slavery bore no resemblance to the European slavery, where people were treated as subhuman, and their children and their children's children were born into slavery. A better description is prisoner of war. Soldiers were captured in war and made to work in societies throughout history. This is what is mentioned in the Quran, prisoner of war, not slavery, where one is kidnapped and forced to work indefinitely. And these prisoners of war were to be set free according to the Quran, if there is any good found in them. But the most successful racism is by far that of the European Christian. The European Christian is audacious enough to look down upon other races, cultures, and religions when they have colonized almost the entire world. No major religion has come from Europe, yet they have colonized major religions. Every major conflict today can be traced back to European Christian colonialism. They put puppet leaders in Iran and Egypt. They split Iraq into 3 factions. America helped Osama bin Laden and the Taliban in Afghanistan against Russia. Yes, America was at one time friends with Saddam, Osama, and Gaddafi. Today, all of them are dead as criminals and terrorists. Former President George Bush said, if you are friends with terrorists, you are terrorists also. The European Christian helped steal the land of Palestine using murder and terrorism to make the indigenous people refugees. They subjugated and killed the Aborigines out of racism. They killed the Native American out of racism. They killed each other over the right to this stolen land. They stole the West Coast from Mexicans. They enslaved the Africans out of racism. Enslaved them for over 300 years. They fought each other also to determine whether or not to keep black people as slaves. White Christians implemented Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow out of racism. European Christians killed 6 million Jews out of racism. They subjugated nation upon nation in Africa. They created apartheid in South Africa out of racism. America, Britain, and Israel supported the South African regime, labeling Nelson Mandela a terrorist, while in fact the South African government were the actual terrorists. And Israel practices apartheid today against the Palestinians. The United Nations found that this Zionist government is based upon racism, where one people are treated differently than the other based upon their race. But what about the non-religious? Some say that if we got rid of religions, we would get rid of all of these problems. But atheism and racism are not mutually exclusive. Did you know that Charles Darwin was racist? His book, On the Origin of Species, is in fact entitled Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. He is the champion of those who attempted to scientifically prove that black people are inferior to white people. In his book, The Descent of Man, he theorized that man evolved from apes and evolved into different races. Because Africans were the first people, he suggested they were less evolved. He classified his own white race as being more advanced than the lower organisms, calling blacks savages, low and degraded. The popularity of his beliefs and theories led to the idea of eugenics, a set of beliefs and practices supposedly used to help improve the human population. With this supposed scientific evidence that black people are genetically inferior, along with the systematic denial of human rights and information, this Judeo-Christian society sterilized black women that they deemed unfit to have children up into the early 1980s. Planned Parenthood was started by a well-known eugenist named Margaret Sanger. She popularized the term birth control. Her aim was to control the birth of black people primarily. The Nazis and Hitler did the exact same thing to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people in turn sterilized the Ethiopian refugees of Israel. According to Forbes magazine, Israel has forcibly sterilized countless Jewish Ethiopian women. They treat their black Jews as second-class citizens. Remember Donald Sterling, the former owner of the LA Clippers. He said black Jews are treated 100% differently than white Jews in Israel. 100%. Darwin was right about one thing. Black people are the original people. The Africans are the first people ever. Other races did not evolve from black people, but they all came from black people. It is the melanin which determines our shade of color, and melanin is conducive to our environment. That we all came from Africa was a fact that I believe was well known, but there are some people who do not know. What do you get when you mix earth and water, what we are made of? Blackness. The most ancient human beings are all from Africa, and Africa has the most genetic variation of all people, because all people come from Africans. You cannot make a black child from a white man and woman, but you can make a white child from two black parents. Therefore, Adam and Eve were black. So when Satan said he was better than man, and when the angels suggested that man would cause mischief in the land, they were participating in a prejudice that has affected people of color since their inception. The marriage of race and religion, and even those who lack religion, has beaten down upon darker-skinned people for thousands of years. How would you expect a people who began mankind, who began civilization, who began institutions of learning, who used medicine and sciences to behave when their entire history is riddled with the most inhumane treatment that anyone has ever endured? Some of them acted out. Some of them bore their pain in silence, praying for change or longing for a life after this one. And some of them fought racism with racism. The racism of America produced the racism of the black Hebrew Israelites, some of the African spiritualists, the black nationalists, the 5%ers, and the Nation of Islam. Consider the hypocrisy of praising a man like Abraham Lincoln for freeing slaves when he said that everything that he has done for the colored race was to save the Union. And if he could save the Union without freeing any slaves, he would do so. And when he freed slaves, he wanted to still send us to Africa. Up to today, when black people are disproportionately stopped, arrested, and killed by those sworn to protect us in broad daylight, the reaction of some have been black religious racism. A shining example could be that of Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, both of whom found refuge in the idea that white people must be evil because of the mischief that some of them have done in the past and most are benefiting from today. Whether they acknowledge it or not, America is the richest nation in the world due to 300 years of African American free labor. And African Americans have not received reparations for these, despite the fact that the government said the very least we deserved was 40 acres and a mule for all of the agony and pain placed upon each and every one of them. Wealth and knowledge are both institutions that are built upon from generation to generation. And we were intentionally deprived of both of them for 300 years. At the very least, we deserve a free education. It was Dr. King who said, a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for the Negro. Since al-Islam, or submission to the will of God, is the first religion ever, the first people ever were Muslims, or those who submit their will to the will of God. The first man, the African man, was a Muslim. That is why al-Islam is so accepted by Africans. They began as monotheists and devolved into making images of a God that is beyond our imagination. Just as Hindu mythology, Greek mythology, and Roman mythology are at their core monotheistic, and man began to deify each attribute of the one true God, so too is African mythology. Half of Africa is Muslim today, and a mysteriously unknown percentage of African Muslims were brought to the Americas. And these Muslims, in my opinion, were the bravest, strongest people ever. Before they were captured, European missionaries were sent to convert them to Christianity. This feat was impossible to accomplish. The missionaries wrote back to their countries that these heathens were not smart enough to accept Christianity, when the opposite was the case. The African Muslims were well educated and fully aware of the stories in Christianity, so stories of a human God did not resonate at all with them. The missionaries had a far better success with non-Muslim Africans. The same is true after slavery began in the Americas. The non-Muslims accepted, be it forcible acceptance, the religion of Christianity, whereas the African Muslims practiced al-Islam and its tenets down to the dietary limits, in public or in private. As the European Christian looked down upon the African for their religions, the African Muslims, even as slaves, thought less of the European for their belief in Christianity. These Africans were prisoners of war, so they were soldiers, and many of them were very scholarly, knowing multiple languages, including Arabic. And they used Arabic to communicate without the slave master's knowledge. They planned revolts, they wrote letters abroad, and they placed themselves in positions to slavery. And he was, and his family were, Muslims. At the beginning of the movie Y.A.M.A, you will note that Africans were making salat on the decks of the ships. Muslims were instrumental in the overthrow of that ship. They were also instrumental in the uprising in Haiti. That African Muslims orchestrated uprising is not surprising, coming from warriors who adhere to a religion that says oppression is worse than death. If they couldn't win their freedom, they practiced as much religious freedom as they possibly could. still performing the 5 daily prayers and even fasting. What other people have shown such resolve over hundreds of years in the worst conditions of slavery? Al-Islam had to be literally beaten out of them, and that didn't work. My father showed his grandmother a picture of Muslims in prayer, and she told him that her parents used to hide in a barn and pray in that exact same manner. The life of Bilal is demonstrative of the life of many Africans and African Americans today. Bilal was an African slave who accepted Al-Islam and endured torture from his slave master to renounce Al-Islam, but he refused. And he was chosen by Prophet Muhammad to call all to the success in worshiping the Creator. Perhaps this is the duty of African Americans today. It is Al-Islam that says we are one mankind. We created you from a man and a female and made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another. At the root of all stereotypes, biases, prejudices, discrimination, and racism is ignorance. We do not see one another as truly brothers. This is why a crime in France gets more empathy than the exact same crime in Nigeria. Islam, unlike any other religion, has a system of promoting oneness with humanity. It calls Muslims to invite others to this way of life. But if they refuse, then we are to live with them in peace. Al-Islam's every pillar is a means to combat the disease of racism. When Muslims meet, they say Assalamu alaikum, which is a prayer that we all live in peace, the peace that God has ordained for us. The Shahadatain is a pledge that there is one God and creator of all, and that he has sent messengers and prophets to every people to deliver his message. He has not chosen one people over everyone else. And the last prophet to all mankind was the man Muhammad. And he said, there is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab over an Arab, nor a white over a black, nor a black over a white, except in righteousness. In Salah, the congregational prayer is more favorable than praying alone. 5 times a day, Muslims pray shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot, bowing their heads to the ground as one in unison, all 1.8 billion. If you could see them around the world, it would look like dominoes. True solidarity amongst human beings. And zakat, the obligatory charity, is a means to help the less fortunate. We are to give of our wealth and our time to those in need. Even a good word or a smile is a charity. Interacting and understanding others is the antithesis of bigotry and racism. And fasting is a means of self-evaluation. It conquers our base selves and gives Muslims a sense of struggle that people face throughout the world. Fasting promotes empathy, and it provides some understanding of the plight of our fellow man. And the Hajj is the greatest voluntary display of unity that this world has ever seen. No other pilgrimage garners such participation. Al-Islam is the only religion that has this ability. It is the unity of the daily prayer times 1,000. Millions of people from every corner of the globe join in a central location, dressed in a simple garment. Their worldly identity is unknown and insignificant as they worship the creator of the universe. Malcolm X taught that all white people were devils. He was one of the most outspokenly racist men in the history of America, but he was moved to denounce his views based upon one pillar of Al-Islam. And there are thousands of African American Muslims who have undergone the exact same transformation, including the greatest athlete ever, Muhammad Ali. These are some of the words that Malcolm X wrote after his pilgrimage. There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe could never exist between the white and non-white. America needs to understand Islam because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met, talked to, and even eaten with people in America who would have been considered white, but the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam. I have never before seen sincere and true brotherhood practiced by all colors together, irrespective of their color. During the past 8 days here in the Muslim world, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, slept on the same rug, while praying to the same God with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And in their words and in their deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among the black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. We were all the same, brothers, because their belief in one God had removed the white from their minds, the white from their behavior, and the white from their attitude. I could see from this that perhaps if white America could accept the oneness of God, then perhaps too they could accept the oneness in man and cease to measure and hinder and harm others in terms of differences in color. With racism plaguing America like an incurable cancer, the so-called Christian white American heart should be more receptive to a proven solution to such a destructive problem. It is my view that we must return to our stronger, braver, wiser selves as Muslims. The only way to move masses of people is through their beliefs. Al-Islam is a learn something and do something religion. It requires participation. The age of ignorance for the Arabs was instantaneously changed by the religion of Al-Islam. Well, we are in the age of ignorance again. Not only ignorance, but celebrated ignorance. Some of us love being ignorant, but the Quran says, indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. We must educate ourselves and everyone else. I am often in discussion about the solutions to racism. One solution is to improve our own condition. The other is to educate others. We need to require the teaching of human history in all schools. Therefore, the unprecedented accomplishments of people of color cannot be overlooked. But it will also help to understand that every accomplishment ever achieved was from the same humanity, whether in China, Egypt, or in Britain. We are all one humanity, just different shades of black. Perhaps this fact will help to erase the plagues of nationalism, culturalism, and racism. Thank you.
Okay, so Brother Ismael, he kind of touched on Bilal, the name Bilal. For those who don't know, Bilal, Ibn Abi Rabah, was the first Muadhin. Muadhin is the prayer caller, the person who calls everyone to the salah, or the prayer, the 5 daily prayers. So I'm going to start off, this is the religion and race. So I'm going to start off with the religious part of this. So the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is praise and peace be upon him, in the Arabic language, he received revelation, as we know, most of us. He received revelation from God. He was inspired. Wasn't direct revelation. It was by way of the angel Jibril. And he set out, based on receiving this revelation from God, to inspire the rest of the people in his area and eventually all over the world. As you now know, Al-Islam is a very fast and widely spreading religion or way of life. So he set out to inspire the people around him, and obviously at first trying to change people who are used to believing in multiple gods, trying to bring them to the belief in one God was a task in itself. And so initially, people were giving him backlash and trying to keep him, keep him quiet, and they did things that were very horrible to him. And they said things about him that, were obviously lies, but they tried to call him the liar. And so he began in Mecca. Eventually, he transitioned and he moved out of Mecca into Medina, which was another city in Saudi Arabia. And eventually, he allowed al-Islam to be spread around. Yes, he allowed al-Islam to be spread around. So that's the religious aspect of it. Moving on to the race aspect of it. How did the race play into this? So you start off with a group of people, all these Saudi Arabians, and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was also among those people, accepting the fact that these people were very ignorant, and they believed in a lot of different idols. You had people worshiping stones and animals and fire even, and so these people were obviously in the age of ignorance. So the Prophet Muhammad brought them out of that. He brought them gradually to believing in one God. So shifting over to Bilal, he was a child out of Ethiopia, and he eventually migrated himself into Mecca. He was a slave child. He was also the son of a slave, and upon hearing the message that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was spreading around, he almost automatically accepted that message, that there was one God. One of the reasons is because being a slave and the son of a slave, you kind of assume there's really no value in my life. What do I have to offer the world? What do I have to offer the people around me besides the service that I'm giving to the person that owns me, my master? Not knowing yet that Allah is the master of everything. And but that was a beautiful message to him once he heard it from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he almost automatically accepted that message. And obviously his master didn't appreciate that. And he was so zealous about his acceptance of Islam and the message of one God that he was oppressed even more so after accepting. His master abused him even more so than he was doing before. Some accounts of his story say that upon finding out that Bilal accepted Islam, he placed a boulder on him. He had Bilal lay out onto the ground. He placed a boulder on him, and he kind of was trying to persuade him to deny Allah, to deny Islam. And of course, he wasn't for that because he was a very strong individual. And some accounts even say, as the boulder was laying on top of him, this is a huge stone, and as this stone was on top of him, as he's in the heat, obviously, he's in the desert, he was still able to make out adhan, which is obviously oneness, the oneness of God. And he said this on multiple occasions, and his master understood that he was just not going to break. As it's been seen in history before, the strong will of people who accept al-Islam is ever present. So the message that Bilal was here, this very zealous Muslim, was here being tortured and being beaten and all these types of things just because of his belief in the one God, when all the people around here were believing in the multiple gods. It reached Prophet Muhammad where he was, and he sent Abu Bakr, one of his companions, to go investigate this claim that this person was not going to be broken because of his faith in al-Islam and his belief in the one God, Allah. So Abu Bakr went to where Bilal was, and he investigated. He found out that the stories and the accounts were true, and he left and came back with enough to purchase. He set up a meeting with his owner. He went by Y.A.M.A. He set up a meeting with him. He discussed the terms and the value of this person's life, what he was willing to accept for Bilal's life. And eventually he came back with that amount. And so this is kind of where I can insert some of the racial part of it. The fact that this master of Bilal, he was so upset that Bilal had accepted al-Islam that he kind of wanted to give him a going away present. He kind of wanted to deter him even more and make him feel like his life was even less valuable than he may have believed before. So as Abu Bakr was purchasing Bilal to free him from Umayyah, the Umayyah left him saying, if you had even bargained with me and haggled with me and said that you would accept if it said that you would pay me one coin, whatever the currency was, one coin, a small amount, essentially is what he was saying. If you told me that you could only give me a small amount for the life of this slave here, I would have accepted that and let you take him with that. Saying that his life had basically no value, even if it wasn't just because he was a slave, the fact that he accepted al-Islam and he accepted the oneness of Allah. And so the businessman that he was, Abu Bakr, and the intelligent man that he was, and the witty man that he was, he came back with him with a retort of, even if you had told me that I couldn't purchase his life with anything less than 100 coins or a large amount of money, I still would have purchased him, just because of his devoutness and his strong beliefs in al-Islam and the oneness of Allah. And so I thought that was a beautiful statement and account of his life. So Bilal eventually came into the presence of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they became the best of friends. And so some of the accounts that Prophet Muhammad gave of Bilal was that he was, it was said that he was the treasurer for Prophet Muhammad, and it was said that he was a very close friend of his, and Prophet Muhammad said that he would forever be the Muadhin of Muadhins, meaning he was the highest of the high as far as Muadhins go, and that he was very honorable, essentially. I'm sorry. So those are the descriptions of him by the Prophet Muhammad. So people that knew him describe him. If this wasn't a issue of pride before, it shouldn't really be. I don't mean to be prideful, but if it wasn't an issue of pride before, just not besides the fact that he was a Muslim and he was so devout and so zealous about what he believed in, the fact that he was a tall man, a black man, and he had a beautiful voice, obviously to be chosen, as the Muadhin and be given such high regard amongst the people. So if you couldn't tell before about the fact that he was of Ethiopian descent, the fact that he's a tall, dark man, that kind of sits nicely with me. So it wasn't beginning, it wasn't initially when he got into the prison. Fairly early in the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, and the revelations describe that he should pray and that everyone should pray the daily prayers, but there was really no official call to the prayer. And so upon arriving in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad kind of realized that there needed to be a call. Going from Mecca, where not many people had accepted al-Islam anyway, there was really no need to reach far distances for the people. People can kind of understand when the prayer was going to be happening because the people were congregating, and you know, those Muslims over there, it's kind of obvious where the Muslims were congregating, whereas other people weren't congregating for the prayers because that wasn't a part of their set of beliefs. They were, like I said, they were believing in worshiping stones and fire and other things like that. Moving into Medina, the crowd, the message of al-Islam spread and it got bigger. So there was a need at that point for people to be called to the prayer so that they knew when it would happen. The Prophet Muhammad had received suggestions for the call to prayer of the horns of the Jews, the Jewish people at the time. They used the horn to call their people to the prayer. And the Christians, they used a bell. The Christians used a bell to attract everybody, to get everybody to know, grab their attention this time of the prayer. The Prophet Muhammad was not pleased at all with these different forms of kind of sat on it and waited for something that was more pleasing to him, and eventually, obviously, more pleasing to Allah as a call to the prayer. One of his other companions, Abdullah, came to him and informed him that he had a dream. It was very exciting. He informed him that he had a dream, and in his dream, there was a man in green clothing. It's crazy, right? I didn't do this on purpose. There was a man in green clothing, and in this dream, the man in green clothing explained to him the call to prayer, the wording of the call to prayer. And so Abdullah informed the Prophet Muhammad of this, and he said, this is surely a message from Allah. This is surely an ayat or a sign from Allah that this is supposed to be called. And so he asked Abdullah to pass that message and give the wording to Bilal. And after calling the adhan, he obviously knew that this was the way to go. This was the way that the attention needed to be brought to the prayer. I think that's all I have.
Are you going to do the call to prayer?
Okay.
Oh.
And so here is the call to prayer that Bilal so beautifully gave us.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah. See, all you ever had to do was talk and build with us instead of tongue lashing. Passing what you heard of Islam and then regurgitating it as pseudo-truth. Now, did you lose your coup? But see, as for me, as for us, as for we, strive for excellence and human potential to feed the starving masses. So come sit at the table that we call a masjid. You would clearly see there's no compulsion and conviction, and faith clearly surpasses religion. It is a way to exercise monotheism in its purest and most pious form. We grip a silent sword in this quiet storm that screams a lot of empty nothings. So yeah, go ahead. Keep Bible clutching while we are Bible reading, better yet receiving the sweet fruits of the Quranic teachings. Then instantaneously they become instigators, disguising infiltration as comradeship. They try to label us a bad nation, all the while claiming not to give into temptation. I hear your sinister violent laughter, resisting the urge to come on my mouth and call you a Kafir. Instead, I'm closing that chapter, embracing the master, playing to make cosmic man feel more adhesive, even if we from different denominations, demographics, descendants, and species. You put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Right.
My husband calls it lemon water. It just has so many different names. But I wrote the poem because a lot of times I asked the Imam this question a few weeks ago. I ponder on why things are happening and what's the purpose behind it. So I like to call the poem Knotted Mind because I guess in a sense my mind is in knots, like trying to figure out why do all of these things happen. But I know that everything happens for a reason, and we have to try to focus on the good that comes out of the negativity. So, for the sake of title, the poem is called Naughty Mind. Thoughts knot my mind like a dreadlock dropped in greasy water. Thoughts knot my mind like a dreadlock dropped in greasy water. Thoughts knot my mind like a dreadlock dropped in greasy water. We ought to feed our intellectual rhymes through our sons and our daughters. Instead, we pray over swine like the pig. We have become slaughtered. Death lingers over our heads like the skies by and by. We shoot our veins to get high. There we filter out our hearts from the dusk to the dawn. Along we sang the song of the devil and Shaitan. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim is what it seems from the day Adam and Eve brought the congregation of people into being. Tasting the fruits of what was to come. God blessed the last prophet, after him there was none. Bow down our knees and pray for God says that you're on the right path and to him you should be led. But we've been shackled and chained by the words that blind us, brainwashed by stonewashed, these materials that confine us, tasting the temptation that holds us back. World makes everything evil the color of black. Scamming and scheming for things we lack. Allow our ignorant minds to control our acts. Mind-boggling, confusing, bad choices we're choosing. Other people we accusing. Some of this is us on us who's abusing. Don't let the serpent leave us bitten. Change the book that's already been written. We're supposed to be moved forward, but we're getting left behind. As thoughts not my mind, these thoughts are of mine.
I want to apologize. I don't have this piece memorized because I don't have it memorized. Just a little bit about this piece. Anybody familiar with the Islamic Monthly magazine? Well, as a considering race is a large part of my work and my life, I kind of take it really personal and get offended when people always say the new black something. Mm-hmm. You know, and I guess it kind of speaks to the particular historical narrative of black people as of late tends to have a lot of social capital as long as we don't use it. Mm-hmm. You know, so I've just kind of taken exception to this whole new black this, that, and the other. And the Islamic Monthly had they had a magazine with the title on it that said, Islamophobia is the new black. And I said, oh, really? So this was my poem in response to that. And I'm not as creative. This is not a person, it's a poem. How in the hell is Islamophobia the new black when the old black is still black, and after 450 plus years we've yet to address that? You're quick to draw these arbitrary connections to our oppression while disavowing the experience of microaggressions at the hands of you. Now, you refers to my immigrant and immigrant descendant co-religionists and your audacity to experience post 9/11 America as we've experienced it for years, but somehow think that profiling and structural racism is immigrant and or Muslim specific. You're tripping. I understand you're uncomfortable with your new post 9/11 nigga status, but as bad as it is, the fact is you're oftentimes turning your backs on blacks in the streets and the masjids. Acting like your regular use of Abid and your refusal to let your sons and daughters marry blacks doesn't speak for disdain for blackness. Mm-hmm. Now, you want to lecture me about my pride and my blackness being shirked, talk about zina and usury, but you getting rich on selling Black and Milds, pig feet, and alcohol in my community.
All right.
I too am Muslim and al-Islam was my destiny, but I never imagined I'd have to look sideways at the op-print next to me. The contradictions are many. I come from a line of women who survived having unborn babies ripped from their bellies. How dare you tell me that your blackness is new? I understand since y'all have had whiteness on loan since 1924, you've adopted anti-black biases to integrate with your suburban counterparts, and that's too bad. But that doesn't qualify as a pass because it doesn't address the anti-black biases y'all already had. Mm-hmm. As I sit in Arabic class on my second day, the Arabic instructor helps everyone around me but my black ass, just like the white teachers I had in the Catholic schools I attended in the past. I can wear a kufi, walk with a 6-foot stick, travel by camel, and wear a thobe, but the camaraderie absent of class and racial bias as a whole is unknown. I'm the one with roots that still bear strange fruit. With a sagging or in suit sipping 40s of mango juice, my experience is the residue of the hate that hate continues to produce. How dare you tell me that your blackness is new? Now, as I sit in Y.A.M.A and listen to the speaker reference Palestinian day-to-day pain related to his illegal Israeli occupation and making dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grace the faces of those emaciated from Israeli apartheid, Zionist ideological exploitation, and complacent human rights organizations in this nation, we're expected to enjoy for others what we want for ourselves. So why can't a bona fide Islamic concern be the racism black folks experience in this nation? Because whether you accept it or not, America has a racialized socioeconomic order that sort of situates black and brown faces in the basis of places, and the traces of your experience link back to black liberation and the eradication of anti-black racism. And that's the truth, even if you don't want to say it or face it. Because for real, y'all had the privilege to talk, but we literally walked from Selma to D.C.
All right.
Posted up on the Capitol twice. Black folk are the litmus test for the granting and guaranteeing of civil rights. So take this seat at Master's table right next to me. Black folk know this road, and we can show you how and where to eat.
All right.
We can be the scale of what to and not to do. Because you've been a sand nigga since 9/11, but being a nigga ain't new.
All right.
In your research right now, I know you did like how communities came together, Arabs came, blacks embraced Islam. So I'm going to tell you from my perspective as a white person in America, my Islam came from hip-hop.
Right.
Yeah.
My introduction to Islam, my understanding of Islam, the fact that the religion existed came through hip-hop culture. I'm just wondering, is that a part of your current research or what?
It will be a part of my future research because I think one of the most underappreciated parts of, I guess what amounts to dawah, especially in urban Abraham.
In Surah 6, Ayat 161 of the Quran is the only prayer we did. It wasn't a salat, it was a dua. But that was all we prayed. So even though we talked that the nation, that the white man was the devil and the black man was the God and all this other stuff, we were told, and even in the message to the black man, under what the Muslims believe, it is written right now, if you could get a copy of it, it says that the Muslims believe in the whole the Islam of the Quran. With all the other things, it says that the Muslims believe in the Islam of the Holy Quran. It's in chapter 5 of the message of the black man, anybody wants to go and verify. So even though people may say that we were not on cue, we only had one prayer. And that was the prayer of Abraham. So, a lot of people read over a lot of things and not actually see things like that because we didn't have anything else. We didn't have any other prayer. That was the only prayer we did every time we went to the temple or whatever, because we were not, we didn't know Salat at the time. But just some additional information about the Nation of Islam.
So to contextualize, I think with the brother and us, I think it's a generational thing, right? How we're introduced, because to speak that he's talking about, Y.A.M.A came to us largely from those brothers our age or a little bit older, speaking it into our years, right?
Yeah, and 5% was like a sect. They broke
Yeah.
off. They were,
Yeah.
I was just saying that was very, very influential in the hip hop culture, and it made you look up Islam. Some people, there's different angles that it came from, but a lot of that was.
So, it's like brother Yusef was saying, so for me, right, I learned from black men about Islam. So when I walked in, with the brothers that taught me, and I walked into a predominantly Arab, and saw how they treated me and them, it goes to, I think, one of the brothers said, it's Islam and then it's Muslims.
Yeah.
And I've learned there were a lot of Muslims that were really quick to want to push me out front, and all the brothers, I mean, literally pulling at me to pull me in, while these brothers who were teaching me Islam, who brought me to Islam, were like, following behind the little new convert, like, what's going on here? So I did see a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yusef?
I guess just to take a step back at the whole discussion about the role that music played in spreading Islam, I think we got to also contextualize in the sense that hip-hop was a good was a vehicle of spreading Islam in contemporary times. Initially, Islam had a whole
Right.
jazz.
Oh, right, right.
Early 20th century.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is once you started getting into the mid-50s and 60s, that's when the NOI comes up. But before that, the most prominent sect of Islam in the black community was the Ahmadis. You have people like Yusef, Y.A.M.A, and it's kind of weird how you have, because at one point, jazz was kind of racialized and religionized in the sense that if you were black and a jazz musician, not only were you a Muslim, even if you weren't, you were also not black. So what happened was during the early 20th century, like 1910 to like 1935, mid-30s or something like that, you had a lot of black jazz musicians converted to Islam and taking a Muslim name because it allowed them to perform in white-only establishments.
Right.
And so there's actually an article that you can probably pull up online now. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but they kind of suckered him into prostrating because they wanted to make him a Muslim and he wasn't. I can't remember the name of the article, but yeah, when you're talking about the black community, communities of colors, Islam, and music has always had a prominent role.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Yes.
More comment?
Yeah, of course.
I'm not sure if it was you, Yusef, that spoke about the differences between the difference between Muslim and Islam.
I think that means.
Yusef, okay. What I have found is that Prophet Muhammad was biracial, and a lot of Muslims don't like to acknowledge his African lineage at all, especially other Muslims. But the other part of it that we have to contend with is their culture, as you mentioned, cultural. They bring a lot of their culture with them more so than they bring religion, and we see it in our neighborhoods also with the merchants, as you mentioned. So just wanted to highlight that point, because I know you already mentioned it. Just highlight it again.
Anybody else have any comments or thoughts?
What do y'all think? I think discussions like this are good. I wish that we had some attendance of immigrant Muslims here as well. Non-blacks, I think it's a discussion that needs to be in order, because you talked about solutions. I think it's a discussion that needs to be had with an array of people from different races and different religions, because that is the title. And I think only then we can kind of come to, and like you said, it's the elephant in the room, it's the elephant in the room that when we do get together, when we do come together, maybe that one time a year for Ramadan, and maybe have our prayer together, it's unspoken, but it is a feeling of like, wow.
What do I do? What do I say?
Yeah.
I don't want to.
And it tends to be the burden of the non-immigrant, the blacks, to
Right.
bring the
To
discussion
right.
up.
bring the
So,
discuss-
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That it's African-American Muslims that keep having this discussion about racism and Islam.
But I think that this is good. I think we definitely need to continue to have conversations like this with not just amongst Muslims, but amongst Christians, so that they can get to understand more about our religion, just and what we stand for, and that we are about peace.
Anybody else?
I just want to say this was a very good forum, and glad I'm a good friend on Facebook. And Bill.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I seen it on Facebook, and I was like, oh, this looks very interesting. I want to go check it out. I just wish it would have been more on Facebook advertising, because I had to go to your website again to make sure I didn't miss the date, because I would have expected it to be, posted every day or something.
Right.
Don't forget, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think it was
Well, when
very
they post a
good.
video, if everybody could share it, because
Right.
I personally learned a lot.
I did too.
I'm not a history buff, so I really learned a lot about just history. Like when you broke down the different classifications, I learned a lot, today. So it was very informative.
It's important because you can't just lead with emotion. You
Right.
know what I mean? You can't just lead all academically. It has to be both. And that's what I really commend you guys for making us a part of this, So.
Whenever we do the next part of this, the next installment, definitely willing to come back and do this again. I actually, not being so big into history myself, you know, and not being my focus, also studying to present today gave me a lot of information that I didn't have before. So definitely encouraging to me to want to get this information out to other people. So whenever you can set up another date for this, I would love to come back.
Is there any other topics that maybe you want, like anybody like wants to discuss or present on that maybe
Anybody?
that you might be interested in?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, that would real. Yeah, inshallah, yeah.
Kwame too.
Oh yeah, race, hip hop, and Islam. Anybody else? Any of the sisters got ideas about anything they want to see discussed?
Kwame.
Yeah, he also.
Want to present? Okay. All right, well. Well, I guess this concludes. Thank you all. I just want to say thank you to all the speakers because it flowed really well. Like, I don't even think we thought it was gonna flow that well. But I really appreciated seeing how every point connected and flowed into each other. And there'll be a part 2. So if you have any ideas or thoughts about what you want to hear, I tend to be partial into like fashion and like hijab and like what constitutes modesty and being covered, and there's a lot of discussions around where you can wear colors and, you know, do you have to look Arab, do you need to wear a niqab, you know, like all of this stuff. So I mean, I kind of am putting my bid in for that as well. But if y'all have any topics you're interested in, we appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you all.
Thank you.